Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden, and what a week. Trevor Zegras had an assist for the ages, but John Tortorella did his best old man yelling at cloud impersonation, claiming that he wasn't sure it was good for the game. Steele, that's despite more than 10 million views in the days following Zegras' highlight reel Michigan pass. NHL players are also considering skipping this year's Olympic Games. The Coyotes were under threat of being locked out of their own arena due to unpaid bills. The Avalanche scored 7 goals in 3 straight games. Lightning coach John Cooper became the fastest NHL coach to win 400 games. The Canucks look like a completely different team under Bruce Boudreau. The Flyers snapped their 10-game winless streak, and the Islanders finally broke the curse and won their first game in their new arena. But we wouldn't have nearly enough time to cover all of those stories in 2 episodes, let alone 1. So instead, we're going to jump to a comment from one of our viewers last week asking us to share some thoughts on some defensemen around the league. So thanks to Leon for his request, and we will be bringing a much overdue segment on some overlooked blue liners later on in the episode, and some potentially league-altering analysis from the crease. But first, we're going to share our top 3 waiver ads for Week 10. Let's start with players owned in 50% or fewer fantasy leagues. Who's your top target this week, Steele?
Yeah, my top target is Evan Rodrigues of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's owned at 37% across Yahoo Fantasy Leagues. And I know I've talked about this guy a lot in the past, but it is very good that I'm talking about him right now because Jake Guentzel is out week to week with an upper body injury. So that leaves a hole for the Pittsburgh Penguins to fill on that top line. And Evan Rodrigues is going to fill that spot and join Sidney Crosby and Kasperi Kapanen. So with Jake Guentzel out of the lineup, Rodrigues is going to get a ton of playing time. And you know, Sidney Crosby, he makes his line mates, he makes his teammates a lot better when they play with him. So with Rodrigues and Kapanen, I think both of those guys are, guys you should look out for to pick up in the following week. But, Rodrigues, he's on the first power play unit because Jake Guentzel is out of that lineup. So he's going to get power play time. He's on the second penalty kill. He was only projected to get 230 fantasy points this year, and he's already at 213. So the fact that he's already there just proves why Evan Rodrigues is the guy for you in the following weeks and until Jake Guentzel gets back into the lineup. He's got 8 goals, 11 assists on the season, over 85 shots as well. He loves to shoot the puck, and I know I say that all the time. Coach Steele always telling the players to shoot the puck on net. You never know what's going to happen, but I think Evan Rodrigues is the guy, just filling that spot for Jake Guentzel and the Pittsburgh Penguins on that top line.
I love Rodrigues, and honestly, I was a little bit not skeptical, but kind of hesitant to jump on that when there was all this buzz about him, and it just keeps on growing. And I think, like you said, it's for good reason. He is producing. At one time, Brian Rust was a nobody. At one time, even Jake Guentzel was a nobody. And like you said, Sidney Crosby has basically made a career of, if you're playing on his wing, you're probably going to be fantasy relevant. And like you said, with Guentzel out, that's just even more opportunity for Rodrigues, who has been excellent even with Guentzel in the lineup. So I'm really excited for what he's going to do. And I predict his ownership is probably going to shoot up really, really quickly. So get on that soon. My pick is Jesper Bratt of the New Jersey Devils. He's owned in just 50% of Yahoo leagues. Despite racking up 24 points in 26 games this year, he's eligible on both left and right wing, and he's been red hot for the last month. He's got 13 points in his last 11 games. Now, Bratt had a bit of a breakout season last year with 30 points in 42 games, and he's building on that this season. The 23-year-old came straight into the NHL from Sweden, and that's a really difficult transition. Most guys at least get some sort of time in the AHL, but I think just now he's showing off his offensive potential. Sometimes it takes a little while for these guys to get used to the speed and just the different type of game that's played at the NHL level. Now, the Devils also have a nice 4-game slate in Week 10, and the second line winger should get plenty of opportunity to put up numbers on Jersey's top power play line. Moving on to players owned in 30% of fantasy leagues or less. Who are you taking, Steele?
Yeah, in 30% or less, I actually went 1% above the requested limit here, and that's Blake Coleman of the Calgary Flames. He's at 31% owned across Yahoo Fantasy Leagues. And this is a very sneaky guy. He's struggling offensively in Calgary. He's never been that type of player who's flashy or, a superstar player. In fact, he's only had a career high 36 points. That was back in 2018. So he's not that top guy. He is on the second line for the Calgary Flames, but he's a necessary player for your fantasy league. He brings depth and he brings an edge to the game that a lot of players don't really have right now. He only has 4 goals and 3 assists on the season, but that's not the impressive part about him. His hits, his blocks, his shots, his penalty minutes. He racks the points up in those 4 categories, and that's why he's at 189 fantasy points right now. So if you're looking for a depth guy, someone to fill a forward spot on your bottom end, I think Blake Coleman's the guy for you.
I think that was a perfect explanation. We talked before the show how difficult it is to start picking guys less than 50, less than 30, especially less than 15%. At this point in the season, if fantasy managers are paying attention, most of the guys who are potential breakout stars are probably already snatched up. Hopefully we find a few of those, but it's more likely we're going to find depth players who are productive. And that doesn't always mean with points. It sometimes means in categories like hits and blocks. My choice is Nino Niederreiter this week. He's eligible on both wings. He saw his ownership actually rocket up 10% in week 9, thanks to a recent hot streak. El Nino has 9 points, 8 hits, 4 blocks, 1 power play point, and is at +7 in his last 8 games. He's actually on the top line with Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen, and he's manning the wing on their second power play unit as well. Carolina has a great schedule in week 10. 3 of their 4 games are at home, and they face the Wild, the Red Wings, the Kings, and the Predators. So I think you should ride Niederreiter while he's hot. It's probably not going to last, but throughout his career, he's had hot streaks like this, and I think it would be worthwhile to pick him up in week 10. Finally, players who should be available in almost every single fantasy league this week. Steele, players owned in 15% of or less of Yahoo leagues. Who are you targeting in week 10?
Yeah, 15%. It's another forward who I've talked about back in a couple of weeks prior to this one right here, and it's Oliver Wahlstrom of the New York Islanders. He's owned at 10% across Yahoo fantasy leagues. He's got 1 goal and 6 points in his last 3 games. So he is on a hot streak right now for the New York Islanders. He's got 8 goals, 13 points on the season, a little bit less than what I thought his production would have been at this point in the season. But I think we're all surprised at how bad the New York Islanders have been this entire season so far. So, it's a little tough right there to see his point production is a little lower on that end, but still 170 fantasy points on the season so far. He has a ton of shots. He has a ton of hits, and, he just brings a lot to the game that the New York Islanders don't have right now. He doesn't get a lot of time on ice. He's only averaging around 12 to 13 minutes, but he makes every opportunity count when he steps on that ice for the Islanders.
I like that pick a lot, Steele. I liked it a few weeks ago when you made it, and I like it even more now. I was considering Wahlstrom myself this week. I actually went with a Devil. I moved on to El Nino after picking a Devil first. I'm going to circle back and go with another Devil here with my third pick. I'm going with rookie Dawson Mercer. He's owned in just 9% of Yahoo leagues. He has a respectable 15 points in 26 games. And even though he's cooled off after a hot streak, he's got just 1 goal in his last 7 games. I've got a good feeling in week 10. And sometimes you just have to go with your gut when you're talking about players who have this low ownership. Mercer took advantage of extra opportunities when Jack Hughes was out of the lineup previously. And of course, he slowed down since Hughes has come back. But Nico Hischier entered the COVID protocol on Saturday, and Mercer slid into that second line center spot, and he centers the second power play unit as well. So again, Jersey plays 4 times this week. I think Mercer will come up big once again for the Devils. He did it when Hughes was out. I think he's going to do the exact same thing with Hischier out. Before we move on to our defensive segment, as we promised at the top, let's touch on a bit of news in the league that could have big fantasy implications as well. The Dallas Stars announced Ben Bishop's comeback attempt is over. A degenerative knee condition that resulted in surgery kept Bishop off the ice for all of last season and the beginning of this one as well. He worked his way back to the AHL, but he realized he could not take it any further. Bishop retires with some incredible numbers: 222 wins, a 232 goals against average, a 921 save percentage, and 33 shutouts in 413 games. That's an incredible career. And what really marked an unfortunate end to that fantastic career. It might just pave the way for a player we've mentioned a couple times on this show to finally break out and be an everyday fantasy contributor. Former first-round pick Jake Oettinger is currently owned in 52% of Yahoo leagues. He's got 5 wins and a .951 save percentage in just 7 games this season. But the man who owns the crease right now is 32-year-old Braden Holtby. He's rebounded in a big way after a disastrous prior 2 seasons in Vancouver and Washington. He is only 5-6-1 this season with a .923 save percentage for Dallas this year. So it's really not so much his fault when you look at that record. It's been the team around him. He's been absolutely great so far. He started 5 of Dallas's last 7 games, despite those really nice numbers from Oettinger. It seems like the Stars have a little bit more trust in Holtby right now, and he's won 3 of those last 5 games. So, Steele, which of these 2 would you rather own for the rest of the season? And do you think this makes Oettinger a significantly more tantalizing trade target in dynasty leagues for you?
Yeah, I think it does. And that's exactly who I'm going with here. I think Jake Oettinger deserves to start in the crease and be that number 1 guy. Obviously, with all the stats that you just mentioned, he has a 5-1 record with a .951 save percentage compared to Holtby's 5-6-1 record and a .923 save percentage. I think that Holtby, it's at a time in his career right now where he's more of a backseat driver than the actual driver right now. Like you said, he's 32 years old compared to Oettinger, who's only 22 years old. I think at this point, Holtby would have a lot better being the backup, being a leader, and kind of showing the way, showing the path for this young guy in Jake Oettinger, who can potentially be a top goalie in the league eventually once he gets, the nod to get a lot more ice time in the crease. And, obviously it's sad what's happened with Ben Bishop. I would have loved to see him back with the Dallas Stars and back to playing the game that he loves and the game that we all love watching him play. But it's unfortunate what just happened. Ben Bishop being forced to retire. Anton Hudobin was mentioned on the trade block that he's potentially that the Dallas Stars are looking to ship him out as well. So with all of that being said, I think it's time that the Dallas Stars need to start looking for their future, start looking towards the future, even though they want to be contending right now. And I think that's giving the nod to Jake Oettinger as the number 1 guy. And I think if you give him the time and the confidence, he can be that guy. You just got to give it to him.
Honestly, I'm a little bit torn on this one because at the start of the season, we were both really bullish on Spencer Knight taking that net in Florida from Sergei Bobrovsky. And you look at Bobrovsky's numbers the last few years, they haven't been great, but clearly Florida has more trust in him right now, and Knight hasn't been able to do that. And I look at this situation and I think it's kind of cup or bust for Dallas. Like, they might not even make the playoffs, but having went all the way to the Stanley Cup final recently, I feel like this team thinks if they can get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, they're a potential cup contender. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but it makes me think that they might want to go with Holtby a little bit more. Just the fact that he's already won a Stanley Cup. He has a lot of experience. This is a veteran team, and I think that they might go that route. Now, if both of these guys were available and you have the room, this is probably pretty unlikely. A lot of teams right now are filled with players on the IR and even ones that you're not able to put in a slot. But if you happen to have a couple slots, it might be worthwhile picking both of these guys up and seeing if one can win the crease. I think they're both going to be worthwhile, though, owning in the league for the rest of the season. I hope Oettinger takes the job, but my gut tells me that it's going to be Braden Holtby the rest of the way. Sticking with goalies for a second, there are a ton of streaming options in the league right now. Ducks backup Anthony Stolarz had to relieve John Gibson in a 1-0 loss to Pittsburgh Saturday, thanks to a lower body injury. And Stolarz started Sunday as well, which is happening shortly here after we record. Charlie Lindgren has 3 wins and a .947 save percentage for the Blues after Jordan Binnington entered COVID protocol. But those situations, there's certainly something to monitor in the short term. Both of those starters are going to retake the net immediately when they come back. I want your opinion on a pair of goalies who are available in more than 2/3 of Yahoo leagues right now and who might potentially be a starting goalie and somebody that you can rely on week in, week out to at least get you a couple starts. Coming into the season, I thought Kings goalie Calvin Peterson was ready to take a bigger share of the net from Jonathan Quick, And I was wrong. That just hasn't happened yet. Peterson is 5-5-1 with an 893 save percentage, while Quick is 7-5-1 with a 933 save percentage. And while they've almost split the starts, Peterson's simply being outplayed right now. However, LA did sign him to a 3-year, $15 million deal that doesn't even kick in until next season. So they have quite a lot invested in Peterson. Interesting to think about whether they might want to continue giving him at least half of the start, see if he can play his way into a bit of a rhythm. On the other end of the spectrum, Ottawa goalie Anton Forsberg has seized the net after Matt Murray was waived and then injured in the AHL. Forsberg is 5-4 with a 904 save percentage. He started 4 of the last 5 games for the Senators, and he just shut out the Lightning to cap off a red-hot 2-week stretch. Forsberg is 4-0 with a 930 save percentage since December 2nd. So it might seem like an easy choice looking at those two numbers, but Forsberg is 29 years old, and he's never won more than 10 games in a season or had a save percentage higher than 908. Steele, which one of these two goalies would you rather have for the rest of the season?
Yeah, looking at Forsberg's stats right there, obviously it's a little bit above expectations and what we thought that he would be able to accomplish right now in the NHL. And obviously those stats are probably going to drop if he continues to get the nod. But I've got to go with him right here. And obviously because Peterson isn't just playing up to par right now. He's gotten half the nods, like you said, with Quick. And, he's just not playing that type of high quality game that the LA Kings really need him to be playing right now. And I agree with you. I thought that at the beginning of the season, he would have been, he would have had the more starts at this point in the season, but Quick is just outplaying him and outperforming him. And that's why they continue to go back to Quick, the 2-time Stanley Cup champion. So for me, I've got to go with Anton Forsberg here.
I think that's the right choice. I think that Peterson is more likely to be available in a few weeks or a little over a month from now if he starts to turn it around and maybe get a little more than half those starts. I'm not sure that's going to happen. The way I look at this is Forsberg probably has a higher floor than Peterson does. I think Forsberg's going to be given the chance to be the number one guy in Ottawa. Of course, the Senators aren't exactly a great team, though. I think Peterson's proven that he's got a pretty high ceiling. He has a 912 save percentage in 65 career games. Forsberg, he's at 903 in 66 games. So I think the ceiling is there if you're going to go with Peterson. If you've already got a couple good goalies and you're just looking to take a flyer on somebody who might turn out really well by the time the playoffs come around, I think that's more likely to be Peterson. But if you're struggling for goalies, if you're looking at somebody who's owned in less than a third of leagues, you probably are just looking for starts and hopefully as many quality ones as you can get. And that's probably Forsberg. It is worth mentioning, though, Ottawa has an insanely difficult schedule ahead. Just listen to this. From December 14th to January 3rd, Ottawa plays the Panthers, Lightning, Flyers, Bruins, Blues, Hurricanes, Capitals, Bruins, Penguins, Leafs, and Wild. So there's maybe one easy game in that entire stretch. There are a lot of really good and really high scoring teams in there. So I think if Forsberg can play well during that stretch, that's going to prove a lot to me. All right, let's wrap up the show with our final segment. I want to note the players that don't meet our criteria here today that might deserve a closer look if they're available in your league. Samuel Girard has 15 points in 22 games for the Avs, and he's just 64% owned. John Klingberg put up nearly 0.7 points per game and 0.32 power play points per game last year. Those numbers are a bit down this season, but they're still high enough for him to be more owned than he is right now. That's just 62% of Yahoo League. Sabres defenseman Rasmus Dahlin, he's averaged 0.56 points per game this season. He's got decent hits, blocks, power play points, and penalty minutes. And a guy you've brought up a couple times this year, Steele, Oilers defenseman Evan Bouchard. He's got similar numbers to Dahlin as well, and they're both just owned in a little over half of leagues. However, we want to highlight players that are more than likely to be available than rostered in your league. So Steele and I have both picked a defenseman that we both think is underrated and underowned in fantasy right now, one that is available in 2/3 or more of Yahoo leagues. So Steele, what defenseman did you go with that you think is worth rostering for the final 2/3 of the season?
Yeah, I think this defenseman I'm about to choose right now absolutely needs to be on your fantasy team, and that's Ben Sherratt of the Montreal Canadiens. He's only owned at 14% across Yahoo fantasy leagues. And I'm actually surprised that he's only at 14% owned. I have him on my fantasy team, and he's my third best defenseman. But that's only because I have Victor Hedman and Darnell Nurse, who have been absolute studs the entire year. So for me, I think you got to pick up Ben Chiarot. He's got 187 points of fantasy points on the season so far, 6 points on the season. But that's not the impressive thing. 52 shots, 60 hits, 49 blocks. He gets all of those points. Like I mentioned with Blake Coleman of the Calgary Flames, he gets most of his fantasy points from those statistical categories on the defensive side of blocking, hitting, and putting his body on the line. But again, he stepped up in a big way to fill the absence of Shea Weber. He stepped up in a big way in the disappearance of Jeff Petrie. He just hasn't been there for the Montreal Canadiens. He's only had 2 points, both of them being assists the entire season. So he's been the best defenseman. He stepped up in a big way. And that's why Montreal is really putting him on the trade block as well. They can get a lot of return for a guy like Ben Chiarot right now. And I think your fantasy team would be very, very beneficial if you pick up Ben Chiarot right now.
That's a deep cut, and I love it, Steele. I think you summed that up perfectly. That's a guy that has a ton of opportunity. He's not going to be pushed out of the lineup. There's no way. And like you mentioned, he's basically stepping up when the rest of the team is struggling. He's somehow still getting it done. So while the points aren't overly impressive, they might actually go up as well if the Canadiens can improve their play. I went with Alex Goligoski, owned in 35% of Yahoo fantasy leagues. He's quietly produced 30 to 40 points, 100 hits, and 150 blocks year in and year out in relative obscurity with the Coyotes and Stars after leaving Pittsburgh. He had a really tough year in Arizona last season, but Minnesota scooped him up, and he has been phenomenal for the Wild. In 24 games, Goligoski has 17 points, 20 hits, 32 blocks, 27 shots, 3 power play assists, and he's a plus 13. He's playing less than 20 minutes per game for the first time in his career, but he's playing a somewhat sheltered role with a guaranteed power play spot on a great team. And it's working beautifully for him. If he stays healthy, I think he should flirt with 40 points, 60 hits, 100 blocks, and potentially double-digit power play points as well. That's going to do it for today's episode. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on social media. As always, leave us any fantasy questions or feedback in the comment section below as well. On behalf of Steele Road, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.